right, welcome to this conversation. It's not a great conversation to have at this point because of the information that's coming out right now in Supreme Court from the Gujarat government. Now, this is where we have, at this point, 11 men sentenced to life imprisonment on multiple counts for the 2002 gang rape of Bilkis Bano, the murder of her entire family, including a 3-year-old child, were given an early release by the Gujarat government. The Gujarat government now, in an affidavit before the Supreme Court, have cited brazenly good behaviour and the central government's approval as the reasons for this release. Now, a couple of things that come up when we talk about the good behaviour. According to a report in NDTV, Gujarat had sought the central government's approval on June 28th in this matter. The sign-off from the centre came on July 11th, so 14 days is how long the centre took to mull over this matter on the different cases against 11 different people. The Supreme Court has now deferred hearing on the petition until the 29th of November. The Indian Express reports that 10 of these 11 men who were in jail for life received more than 1,000 days of parole, furlough or temporary bail, which means they were outside of jail for more than 1,000 days each. That's about 3 years each. NDTV reports that multiple FIRs and police complaints have been filed against the accused convicts for threatening and harassing witnesses, which runs against and completely contrary to the argument of good behavior. These 11 men, like I said, gang raped Bilkis Bano in a village near Ahmedabad on the 3rd of March 2002. She was pregnant at the time. They also killed her young child. She fought from 2002 or 2004 when the case came to light to 2019 before the final conviction from the Supreme Court. That's 17 years of her life spent in and out of courts fighting cases, and now these men have been released scot-free. Also, the release of these people who've committed heinous crimes, murder, gang rape, crimes against small children, it flies against the Union government's own rules, which clearly state that rape convicts cannot be granted release. So up until now, we thought the Gujarat government was sort of colouring outside of the lines and released these people, going against the rules of the central government. But now the Gujarat government says that it checked with the central government. So here is the central government that has rules that say one thing, but have decided something else altogether. The irony of the fact that this was a celebration of our independence is kind of something that we're going to set aside. But what we're going to look at right now is what the letter of the law says, because after everything, the one thing that we can be completely sure about is the law and our constitution. It's outside of politics, it's outside of any sort of communal feelings that anybody might have, and it's certainly outside of our governments. Joining me right now, Karuna Nundy, who is a lawyer with the Supreme Court. Ms. Nundy, good evening, and thank you for joining us. It's a terrible thing to have to discuss, but here we are. These men were released around Independence Day, which is August. We're now in September. They're still out scot-free. None of us can understand how this could possibly happen. And now we understand that the central government made this decision across 11 people without considering or applying their minds to each individual. How does this make sense against, before the law? How does this pass muster?
I think that the mistake that a lot of people make when thinking about this case is thinking about it in terms of a single rape. This is a case in which, this is a rarest of rare case. This is a case in which 14 members of Bilkis Bano's family were killed, and her child was dashed to death before her eyes, her 3-year-old daughter. That she was raped. I mean, the people's stomachs were cut. I mean, this is a really, really egregious case. And if cases like this qualify for the death sentence, which I am against, then how can they not at the very least qualify for a life means life type of sentence? Because that's what the law says. Life means life, right? Now, in very particular circumstances, you might consider remission. So there are two issues here. One, that the Supreme Court appears to have made an error in ascribing this jurisdiction to the Gujarat government, that this jurisdiction should have been of the Maharashtra government. The Supreme Court itself had transferred the case from Gujarat to Maharashtra on the ground that it is not possible to have a fair trial in Gujarat. So, if it's not possible to have a fair trial in Gujarat and these men have been released, these convicted gang rapists, murderers, child murderers, and killers have been released from Godhra. And this is not something that should be ignored because this is a political decision that is being made by governments, right? Then why is it that the Gujarat government was in any case keen to usurp the jurisdiction of the Maharashtra government? Why is it going out of its way? Initially, some of us had pointed out that under the law, what is required is the concurrence of the central government. Now, here it's clear court proceedings, approval was explicitly taken. So when you have the Prime Minister speaking of Nari Shakti from the ramparts of our Red Fort, and then on the same day, these 11 convicts are released for good behavior. And quite apart from anything else, as you've correctly pointed out, the fact is that the good behavior is in the face of an allegation of molestation while they were out, while one of the convicts was out. That not only is there non-application of mind, but to the extent there is application of mind, there is blatant arbitrariness, even if the Gujarat government and along with the central government correctly had jurisdiction. So where does this bring us? This brings us to a decision that appears to be squarely political. And to think that there is the ruling dispensation, no less, thinks that it is politically expedient to take the sides of gang rapists, killers, and child killers is something that every single person, not woman, not Muslim woman, not child, but every single human being in this country should be deeply concerned and, in fact, quite scared about. Because it is
But
clear that when you're condoning rape in a particular case and killing in a particular case, then it doesn't just impunity doesn't just stay in the little box that of identity, of very particular identity. Impunity has a way of spreading and spreading fast.
But what I don't understand is this: if this flies in the face of every rule and law we have, how is this happening?
There is a discretion that there are a lot of things that are happening contrary to law. It's because at the first instance, we expect government to abide by law. And then if there are any errors or any disagreements, then that is when the courts are meant to step in and rectify these issues. The problem is that at the first instance, when you have governments not adhering to law and constitutionality, that is when the problem lies, because government is much bigger, as it should be, than the court system. You see? And so government just decides to, you have two judges who have spoken up against this order. You have the judge you have Judge U.D. Salvi, and you have the Judge Mridula, who made the decision in Maharashtra. And so now the thing is that when you have very clear findings on law and very clear decisions saying that this is really should not be done, when you have judges speaking out and the government acting contrary to that, and now the decision by the Supreme Court will only be made subsequent to the elections, and the government will, if there is any benefit to be had, then the government will have that electoral benefit, and this is a travesty.
So, the fact that the Supreme Court has deferred its hearing on these petitions challenging the release until the 29th of November, why is this not being considered an urgent matter?
Look, there are various vacations coming up and Supreme Court vacations coming up, and they will not be sitting. there are a number of matters that were listed on an urgent basis, including constitutional benches. So there are lots of five-judge benches, for example, hearing issues like demonetization, hearing lots of different issues. And so the judge's time is taken up to a very significant extent. At the same time, I think for many citizens, this is a priority, and one would hope that it would be taken up on a priority basis. The
I
GM
mean,
case, I
to
think a
me,
lot of people were quite startled by the fact that it was listed on a Saturday. So,
yeah.
so we need the Chief Justice, the master of the roster, to obviously judges need discretion to decide what is urgent or not. But if somebody like Jane Sai Baba, who had been acquitted, there's a urgency to send him back to jail, then this kind of profile of case where they are out on remission, and in this very extreme type of case where there is a allegation that a crime on the other end of the spectrum of the same sort of crime, a sexual crime, that there is an allegation that has been committed, then really, an early hearing is something that should be sought and must be sought.
Because as a citizen, to me, it sounds like there are 11 people who thought collectively that it was okay to hunt down members of one community, to rape and murder each of them in complete cold blood in the most heinous way, including a small baby. These people are now free to roam the streets and are among society. This is exactly what the law should prevent from happening. How does anybody in that state feel safe to sleep tonight?
I think that's exactly right. And the way you have put it, I think, goes to the heart of the urgency in the matter. What I personally find particularly troubling is that two governments ruling in the state as well as the center would go out of their way to do this. And we hear that, oh, that they have spent 14 years in jail, and I mean, that they have spent a significant amount of time in jail. Now, the point is that can the collective conscience only rise up in particular cases and not in cases where the victim looks only slightly different, or the victims look slightly different from
Are
one?
you saying, Ms. Nandi, that the millions of people across the country who rose up in protest after the Nirbhaya case are quiet at this point because Bilkis Bano is Muslim?
I think that it's not just the millions of people in this country. I think that there is a way in which um, it's wonderful to have people like you, because when you look at the Adani takeover, the soon to the scheduled Adani takeover of NDTV, when you look at the pattern of media ownership in this country, when you look at electoral bonds and the fact that we don't know which companies are giving money to government and receiving a quid pro quo, and therefore the media environment is vitiated by a certain amount of bias, then not only do we have a situation where there's just a presumption by our ruling party that the votes will go in a particular direction due to usurpation of the jurisdiction and due to the fact that the victim was Muslim, we have a situation where the sort of large legacy mainstream media is not very vocal about this. And we have a situation where you have the sort of voice of the political party and their IT cell and their cohorts being very active on suppressing the the fact of this outrage.
This, quite frankly, even personally, I find this distressing. And the fact that we have to have this conversation is extremely distressing. So I'm going to stick with the law so that that's a little more clerical and it's easier to deal with. What are the rules pertaining to good behavior?
I mean, the discretion. See, there were certain rules that were guidelines that were put out more recently, but the Gujarat government is saying that this is not something that applied to them then. What applied was the rules, not the rules that recently came out, but the previous rules. Um, and so, therefore, a rule that, you know, allegations and FIRs with regard to a similar act would certainly not qualify you for good behavior, right? So they are saying
So
that
what
there's a wider discretion that was given to them, so they're exercising that discretion.
so what happens now, Ms. Nundy, when the Supreme Court finally does hear this matter in late November? What could we hope for?
I think there are a number of issues that one hopes will be raised. One is that the jurisdiction was not of the Gujarat government in the first place, and that the jurisdiction was usurped. And if a mistake has been in that regard, then that may be fixed either by this bench or by a larger bench. So I think that actually is the most significant issue, that the jurisdiction was of the Maharashtra government. However, given that the Maharashtra government has massive support of the same political party, we don't know whether the decision would be any different, because if the central government adhered to this decision, then is there any point even in other than correct precedent being laid down in law, which also is extremely important. Um, but in real terms, in this case, to send it back to the Maharashtra government. Then I think that the manner in which this discretion was exercised um, speaks clearly to a non-application of mind and also to a manifest arbitrariness. And manifest arbitrariness has always been a very significant ground to strike down rules. It's also a significant ground now after Faye Bano to strike down law. But it's always been a significant, for a long time, to strike down um, discretion, the manner in which a decision is made or discretion is exercised. So one hopes that the Supreme Court will act and act fast in this manner, and that these people will go back to jail.
Ms. Nundy, thank you for joining me and having this conversation with me. For our audience, of course, we're looking at the Supreme Court, but it is a terrible moment in the history of our country if, as women of this country who participated in the fight for stronger rape laws against heinous crimes, remember that's what the battle after Nirbhaya was for stronger, tighter rape laws for heinous crimes. To see a woman who has fought for 17 years of her life against those who murdered her family and gang raped her, to see those men walk free with impunity in this manner is just disheartening. And it goes against everything that the law should stand for. And we do hope that the Supreme Court realizes what this means to the larger population, especially to the half of us who are watching very carefully at this decision. Thank you.